Welcome to a special bonus episode of So Much Crime, So Little Time.
We recently covered the final days of Sergeant Tibbs, the story of a cat, its owner, and a whole lot of drama.
We just got the opportunity to chat with the host of that podcast, Todd Bookman.
Todd is a general assignment reporter for New Hampshire Public Radio. He has been there since 2009.
Before NHPR, he spent nearly a decade in the non-profit world working with international development agencies and anti-poverty groups.
He also holds a master's degree in public administration from Columbia University, and as you'll hear, if you didn't know already, is himself a cat owner and longtime cat lover.
We really enjoyed this conversation and getting an opportunity to chat to Todd, and so we really hope you enjoy this too.
Todd, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. We really enjoyed listening to the podcast, and we're delighted to have the chance to talk to you. So thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, just to start off, we'd love to hear how you ended up covering this story, just in a bit more detail. How did it come about? Like, how did you find out about it? I know there was a mention of you, a friend mentioned you should cover it. But then going into it in so much detail and actually creating a podcast, I'd just love to hear some of the background there.
Sure. So I am not a super online person. And so while much of this was blowing up on Instagram and Facebook, I was unaware. And it actually took an acquaintance, actually this tattoo artist that I happen to know. He reached out to my wife, who is on social media, and he said, there is this thing happening, and I really think Todd should look into it. And I didn't quite understand what was happening. It was really hard for me to make sense of all the players, of the timeline, because I was sort of coming into it in the very middle of this sort of nasty back and forth between these two people fighting over a cat. And it just seemed really bizarre to me. And so it actually took a few days, of me sort of going and sitting with these people, the people who were experiencing this situation. And that's Rose, who is the owner of this 19-year-old cat named Sergeant Tibbs. And then the next day I met with Debbie, who's a neighbor and her daughter, they essentially find/rescue/keep this cat. And so it really took sitting with these people to understand what was happening. And then that was all done in the first week. And then it still took months for me to then work backwards and try to unspool how we got to that point, how we got to this point of such intense animosity between these two people and the tension over this cat. And I just was chipping away at this sort of as a side project because I just was fascinated by it. And it just took a while to piece everything together.
When you first went to speak to Debbie and Sabrina and to Rose, did you anticipate that this was going to be, bigger than like covering it as a story and like that it was going to be a podcast? Or at what point, I suppose, did it become clear to you that this is a longer, complicated story that needs to be put forward as a podcast?
With the benefit of hindsight, I think I knew right away that I was dealing with something that was so far outside of the box of what I typically do. I'm a daily news reporter. I churn out a lot of breaking news stories. I cover events in New Hampshire. I cover, legislative hearings or sometimes debates. Every now and then I get to work on longer stories, but I think I knew right away that there was something really complex here that could stretch out into something much longer. I don't think I knew right away that it was going to be a podcast. I've never written a podcast before. We have a great podcast team here at NHPR. I've had the opportunity to help edit some other podcasts. People know about Bear Brook and 13th Step. Like, this is a shop that's done a lot of really great podcast production. I've had a finger in it, but it's never been my story. I think it took me several months before I realized I think we've got enough here to stretch this out into something longer format. And then it also took months to convince the team here that that was the way to tell this story. There was a lot of internal hand-wringing, you've got a lot of plot, a lot happens in this story, but I'm not sure it's a podcast that the world needs to hear. And it took a lot of thought and a lot of drafts to sort of get a feel for what it was going to sound like and what themes were we going to tease out. And like I had this idea for making it feel very literary, and then we mucked with the timeline, and then we just had to restructure a lot of times, and it took a while to germinate into a podcast.
Yeah, can I ask about one? Actually, I'm curious about a lot of that, but one specific thing that you said. What was sort of the angle that kind of convinced your team that this was a story that the world needed to hear?
Yeah, I'm not sure we ever fully coalesced around like one exact angle. I think in the trailer we talked about this idea of like what happens when a fight on the internet spills out into real life, and what happens when two neighbors get into a dispute. And then we thought bigger picture, like, does this fight over a cat say something more about how we treat each other? The ability for people to give each other the benefit of the doubt feels lost in this moment. And I think that is exactly what may have led to the tension between these two neighbors over this cat. I took it also seriously. I re-listened to it because I wanted to be, fresh for this interview. And I re-listened, and I my notes for myself right now are, man, you sounded so serious. And like, there was no wink and a nod to the audience. Like, I know we're talking about a cat here. But in the moment, this was so important to the people who were living this, and I got sucked into it because I was sort of a conduit of information for these people, that I think I had to take it so seriously, and then I'm thinking about it constantly, and it's like, well, what does this say? And it ultimately came down to like how we treat each other. That was the best sort of angle I could come up with for why this was a story worth telling.
I think the seriousness was so important, though, because for me, what was interesting, so what Jeff and I usually do is we take turns finding a podcast we want to cover. And at the end of covering one podcast, the other person just introduces this new podcast. So Jeff didn't know that I found this podcast. He didn't know what it was going to be about. And when I introed it, I think he was like, okay, I don't see the crime here. It's not even classified on Spotify as true crime. But I had found it on Reddit as someone saying, you're looking for a true crime. Listen to this. It's kind of wild. And I think your seriousness made it clear that this wasn't about Sergeant Tibbs. This was about the broader, there's so many different crimes going on here, and so many human elements that we need to like step back and look at how society functions right now. So it was serious, and I thought that was so important to tell it like that.
And there's so much like grief expressed by Rose specifically over the death of her cat, that for me to not take it seriously, I think would have been I don't know if disrespectful is the right word, but I just don't think it would have been fair to Rose to not take it as seriously as I took it. And same thing to Debbie, because she's been accused of these things. And if I don't take it seriously to try to figure out what the truth is it true crime? It's like true crime adjacent, right? I mean, nobody is accused of a crime by the police. Like no law is broken. There's an investigation by police and by animal control, but like, and there's a court scene because there is a restraining order filed, but it certainly fits the themes of what I think a really great true crime story has, which is that there's innate tension and mystery, right? I mean, that's why we listen to true crime. Like really well done true crime has all of those factors, and it hopefully tells us something a little bit more about either the criminal justice system or some other sort of structure, or simply about how humans behave when stretched to a breaking point.
It's very different from Bear Brook. I think if you put Bear Brook and this in the true crime, under the true crime umbrella, like they're on different sides of the spectrum.
Also, Bear Brook is on the Mount Rushmore of true crime. This I would not put in the rubble at the bottom of Mount Rushmore, but go ahead.
Well, I think we like to jump around and not. With our podcast, one of the things that I often bring up is that there's these tropes in true crime that I find problematic sometimes, or I don't want to just listen to the same story over and over again. And what I like about this is unlike anything else we've listened to. This is a very different type of story, but it's also not the story I expected from the sort of tease and from the title, right? Like I think, actually, I want to ask you about the title. Because as I've told people about this, one of the things that often comes up is, you know the cat dies. It's right there in the title, The Final Days of Sergeant Tibbs. I'm curious about sort of the deliberate nature of that choice of sort of giving away an element of the story. I mean, it's a 19-year-old cat. Like it's maybe inevitable, but how did you arrive at that title?
There was not a great deal of internal debate about that. I proposed it. It felt right to me from the start. I felt like the story was so much set in that 1 week period when it's clear that Tibbs has not run off, that Tibbs had been found, and then there's this incredible tension between these two characters. I knew I wanted to focus on those few days and had to focus on those 2 days for the narrative structure. I guess the title, I thought of it, again, I thought of it as like, well, if this was a novel or a novella or a short story, like what would a good title be to sort of tease? I'm curious, I guess I'm curious, Jeff, why, like what maybe you were expecting. Is that fair? Can I ask you a
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I thinking back to before I'd listened to it, I think I was caught off guard by the social media element of it. I think I try to go into these very cold and not read the description, not read the episode titles. And so I thought it was about this cat and these neighbors having a fight about a cat. A very old cat. I think when the issue of race came up, that was also sort of a surprise. And I think like in our discussion on it, once we listened to it, I think we spent a lot of time talking about several different big elements of this that you were alluding to before, just about sort of the nature of social media and kind of how people relate to each other. Yeah, I think like how this cat story became sort of a microcosm for that. One of the things I compared to, like I compared it to like This American Life story or something like that, where I feel like it did a great job of like telling this small story, but that you can just sort of extrapolate out to this much larger truth that we all sort of experience. But it's so short. Like this is it's very compact. So I think the amount of things that happen in, I don't know, how long is it? Like from start to finish, maybe a couple hours?
It's less than 90 minutes, I think, totaled.
So less than 2 hours. Like it's a dense story that goes to a lot of different places. Yeah, I think it's just like how many kind of pivots that story takes surprised me.
Jumping on from that, just one of the things that we noticed or we noted in our recap was we often say, oh, why was that podcast so long? Like it could have been condensed. I didn't need to hear the repetition of information. And when we finished this one, I was like, I want more. I want more. Like I felt like I had questions and I wanted to. And I think that's a real compliment to the story as it was told, because you didn't, I was going to say flog a dead horse, which feels like a bad thing to say when we're talking about the final days of Sergeant Tibbs. But you didn't keep repeating things. You kept it quick and you kept those pivots there. And at the end, I was so engaged in it, and I didn't expect to be, because I'm not a cat person. I'm sorry. So I was like, whatever, like old cat, he's fine. But there was just so much in it that like kept me so engaged. And yeah, I think to cover so much within such a short space of time was just, it was fantastic.
Well, I'll take it as a compliment that it was short. I'm worried that if it was left with open questions for you, Dee, that maybe I should have put some more in there. But I feel like it came out at the length that felt right. I am probably influenced because a lot of the stories I write are 60 seconds. I write a lot of day-turn news stories that are 60 seconds, sometimes 4 minutes, sometimes 8 minutes. I never get to stretch out and write at this length and have the flexibility of just telling the story for what it is. Your comment about it feeling like a This American Life episode, that is probably a consequence of listening to so much This American Life and being so influenced in my own storytelling. And what they do so beautifully is tell a small story that says something bigger, and hopefully this sort of approached that in some way. But I don't know if there's more to say. I don't know. I feel like by the end of it, I was like, oh, okay, it's time to move on. I don't.
That's interesting how for you this is a longer sort of format to play with than what you're used to. There were a couple of things that we wanted to ask about the story that maybe didn't have a place in the podcast as you designed it, but we're just kind of curious about if you have thoughts on. One of the things that surprised me was the sort of full participation of Debbie and her daughter. were they kind of available to you without reservation? Because I feel, and I ask that because I feel like they come off not looking great here, but they seem to very much be willing participants.
I think they were. They certainly were originally. I think I first approached them in a moment where there were a lot of things being said about them on the internet, and I'm not sure they knew how to counter that. They put up their own Facebook post, but the repercussions were pretty severe to them in those first few days when this blew up. Their business essentially had to shut because employees at the spiritual shop did not want to come into work. They're just being sort of tarred and feathered online. And I think perhaps in me, they saw an outlet to get their side of the story out. Maybe they saw me as a non-biased voice because I didn't really know the situation. I wasn't Team Rose. I wasn't Team Debbie. I was just somebody with a microphone who was trying to figure out essentially the blow by blow of what happened. And I was really appreciative of Debbie and Sabrina for giving me so much time, especially in the first week or so that I started reporting on it. And then they agreed to meet me on occasions down the road as I became aware of new information, as I got a copy of the police report. They were willing to sit with me again, and I give them a lot of credit. I give them a lot of credit for that. Yeah, they faced a lot of blowback throughout this process, and I potentially they knew that they could sort of quote unquote use me as an avenue to get their side of the story out, and that's okay. That's like sort of what I was doing there. That's why I had the microphone.
Do you know how they feel about did they listen to the podcast? Did they give you feedback?
I had it. I had an interaction, and I think they were. I don't know if they listened to the whole thing. I think there was frustration. I mentioned this in the podcast, but they, to this day, are still not willing to admit that Tibbs was Tibbs. They have floated this idea that the cat they found was actually some other half-shaved 19-year-old starving skinny cat, which I don't give credence to. We've seen photos of the cat they found, and it's the same cat. And so I think they were upset that I didn't make more of an issue of this theory of theirs, but there was just simply no evidence to back up this theory. I mean, there's enough photos of the cat floating around. We know it was Tibbs. So I don't know what they say about me. I don't know.
Okay. What I guess the flip of that is, what about Rose? Like, did she have feedback on how? Because I feel like this was a remarkably balanced presentation of the story. So I'm curious about her reaction.
In the immediate aftermath, Rose just texted me essentially, "Thank you," and I think she felt like the story captured her perspective. I think it honored, in a way, her grief and the tragedy of the moment for Rose, which was important to me. I can't, in the position I'm in, I can't go in and I can't come out of a story worrying how somebody's necessarily going to feel about it, and that wouldn't drive me. At the end of the day, I hope both of these sides, I hope Rose and Debbie felt like they got their statements out, got to express how they felt about it. But for the story, I just kept trying to be very fact-based. I tried to rely on like the quote-unquote evidence at hand. Again, I sound so serious. I realize we're talking about a 19-year-old cat that people tussled over the ownership of. But to these people in the moment, it was so serious that I really tried to sort of just, here's what we know, here's what we can't know. There were people afterwards who came up to me and said, I would ask a question like, well, who do you think was right? Because I wasn't willing to say that in the story because I'm not sure I can answer that question. And a lot of people were like, well, I didn't like Rose, I didn't like Debbie, I didn't like either of them. And that always gave me pause, like, oh, what did I frame these people in an accurate light? I have to frame them somehow. I just always worried about that. Like, was I being fair to them? And I don't know what they would say about that.
Jeff and I kind of debated the idea of a reliable narrator here, and who we felt was a reliable narrator from what we heard in the podcast. We felt the podcast was really balanced on that point, but was that intentional? Was one narrator more reliable? I know you've said Debbie and Sabrina still to this day kind of won't admit that Tibbs was Tibbs. Sergeant Tibbs, sorry. I keep calling him Tibbs, and I can't do that. We got to give him his title. Sergeant Tibbs was Sergeant Tibbs. And so I just wonder, like, do things like that make you kind of question the reliability between that and when Debbie ran out after you at one point saying, oh, Sabrina said that she found him out the front, but it was actually out the back.
Right.
I just don't want that to be incorrect. Like these kind of things, like did that give you pause to say what I felt you didn't do is like you put that information there. You said Debbie ran out and corrected what Sabrina had said, but you never put your own opinion on that. You left it there for the listeners to make their own opinion, which I really liked. And I felt like that was a lot to do with you allowing us to decide who the reliable narrator was. So I'm wondering like how intentional it was for you to make it very balanced.
I don't know if balance is exactly the word I would choose. I wanted it to be essentially fair to both of them and what their reflections of these moments meant to them. Balanced would imply to me almost like I gave them equal airtime, or I agreed or believed both of what they were saying, which would be impossible because they each had separate memories of the same conversation. Like they had conversation, they had the conversation on their porch, the Friday conversation, and they each had wildly different versions of what happened during this conversation. And so for me, like, I don't know how I can balance that except to just try to give the listener the best understanding of like what each of them claim happened. And then, yeah, I didn't feel it appropriate for me to then chime in with like, well, this is who I believe in this moment because I wasn't there for it. At the end in Act 4, I sort of take the curtain down a little bit and talked about how I think everybody here misbehaved at times, like didn't express the best judgment or the best courtesy towards their fellow man. But I don't know. I don't know if balance is the right word. We struggled a lot with how much to have me be a narrator or a character. Obviously, I'm the one reporting this, and a lot of true crime is built around a reporter seeking the truth, like trying to get to the bottom of something. And that is great as a listening device because the listener then wants to tag along, like, oh, they trust or they hopefully like, quote unquote, like the reporter enough that they want to see the story through their eyes and they get invested in it because the reporter became so invested in it. And in initial drafts, I didn't write it that way. I didn't have myself as like a character. I didn't explain how I got the tape or when I got the tape. I tried to write it differently. And in the early feedback I got from the team here, it was like, but why should we care? We need to care because you cared so much. And that's something a lot of great true crime and just podcasters in general can do. Like they get you, the listener, enthusiastic about it. And so it was made clear, like, I was really into this. To me, this was like the most important story I reported of the entire year. Like it was so intense. It was so interesting to me. I learned so much about cat rigor mortis. Like I just felt like I gained a lot. And the editors that I worked with, including like some really great people, were like, we need to hear that. We need to have that come through. And so if it's like, there's balance, but then there's just how I sort of viewed it as well, without trying to shape it, without trying to put my finger on the scale. And I hope that's how it came out.
Oh, it definitely did. It definitely did. On the note of cat rigor mortis, we have a question. Would you believe? Was there more? Like you're saying, like you learned about it. Was there more there? Like, was it? It felt like when you were presenting it, you were saying, there's question here. It seems like this cat was most likely dead for longer than is being told. But then on the other side, it's like, well, some people do say that it is possible, given all of these things, for rigor mortis to set in much quicker. So we're just kind of, again, we're going to put that out there. Was there more there? It felt to me a little like I was just wondering whether the likelihood of rigor mortis setting in very quickly for this cat was actually much smaller, but we have to put it there because it's not impossible.
I felt like because it's an area of essentially scientific study. I needed to let the science be the guide. And
Mm.
I have two researchers who I reached out to, one of whom I interviewed. He was very gracious to spend time speaking with me. And he was very upfront about how little we actually understand about cat rigor mortis, that despite a lot of, I guess maybe not a lot. I don't know if they've actually done a lot of studies on feline rigor mortis. And I think he might say that that's okay, that we don't need to do more. And then there was a researcher in Europe who I only corresponded with via email. Neither of them said yes, a cat is going to go stiff within minutes. But neither of them said it's categorically impossible. And so for me to use the information that I have, which is that the veterinarian, the staff at the animal shelter who took in Tibbs said this cat is stiff. They said this cat does not look like a cat that's died within the last hour. I put that in the story, but I don't know if I, with the help of this scientific research, can say smoking gun. So I don't know, Dee, if I can really come out and say anything more than what was in the story.
No, I think
you as a
you've. I think that's enough.
I think listeners might hear it and say, I don't believe the science. Like, I don't think a cat goes rock hard in 10 minutes. And that's okay. I guess it's okay if the listener walks away with that perspective.
I didn't imagine us spending this much time talking about cat rigor mortis, but it is sort of baffling to me that, I mean, people have had cats for thousands of years as pets. I mean, the Egyptians had cats, right? Like the ancient Egyptians. I feel like that there would be more data on that. I don't know.
I'll let you can do more deep dives. I felt like I did my due diligence and needed to move on.
One thing I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask: are you a cat person?
Oh yeah.
What's your yeah?
Oh yeah. No, I grew up with cats. I have a cat now. I wrote the majority of the first drafts of this story with a cat in my lap.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'm a cat guy. I have a dog too. But...
One different thing I wanted to ask you about was with regards to Rose and kind of the social media side of this. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to come back to it. Rose post this on social media. Was it Justice for Tibbs, right? Like that's like the hashtag. It goes viral. It inspires like in-person action. There's also people like review bombing the shop, Debbie's shop. And I guess I'm just curious, like, I have several questions around this, but the general question is just around like, how far do you think Rose wanted this to go? I'm just curious about her state of mind when she does this, because I feel like you have no control over how viral something goes and how people respond to something they see online. But I could picture her, and again, I don't want to put like thoughts in her, but like you do something out of sort of a knee-jerk reaction to a moment that bothers you, you're upset, you're grieving, there's lots of things going on.
But she also had experience at creating kind of viral campaigns from memory of like for previously. So it wasn't that she was going in fully cold to that.
My sense is that Rose is an online person, and Rose knew social media language. I think she knew how to post in a way that would get attention. She has experience doing social justice organizing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she felt like she was in a moment of almost like helplessness. Like she had gone to the police. The police were not acting immediately. It happened to be the weekend, and the animal control officer was like, we'll deal, like, this is a Monday problem. Like, we're just going to have to ride out the weekend. And then your Rose, who thought her 19-year-old cat had died, 3 weeks go by, she finds out that the cat is alive and being kept with somebody else. And I think, and she said this, it's like she wanted support. She wanted a pressure campaign. She wanted, to apply that force to Debbie and see if that would be enough to get Debbie to relent and give the cat back.
I don't know. I think like obviously we all bring our sort of biases to these stories. And we talked about this in our preview episode of this, where like I come to this with a sort of an initial bias for Rose as the cat owner, feeling like Debbie, there's other biases there related to sort of the racial makeup of this story and the potential for, and we haven't really got into that, but I feel like the power of the internet to wreck someone's life and to really just destroy, to destroy a business, to ruin, like, to just cause hell for someone. It's a big weapon to wield, right? Like it's a really dangerous and sort of out of control weapon. And to me, like, that's the sort of big challenge of seeing Rose as sort of the hero of the story is she did something very dangerous and arguably irresponsible.
And there were repercussions for that. There was a restraining order filed, and a judge signed off on a 1-year restraining order, essentially a gag order, saying, Rose, you have to stop. You cannot post about this situation. As you pointed out, Jeff, the most sort of vile posts made against Debbie and Sabrina they were not made by Rose. Like, this is a situation where, like, you could say she lit the match, and then it spiraled out of control. And maybe that is something that we should all have been able to foresee. Like, you just can't control internet behavior. You can't control the trolls. Like, it was out, and then there was no reining it back in, and it had consequences. I mean, everything. It's a good life lesson for all of us. Like, maybe we should all be posting less. Like, you just can't control how it's going to be read, how it's going to be seen, what other people are going to do about it.
Yeah, moving on to like the race element that is brought into the story. The story in particular about, is it Sonia? It's not Sonia, it's Sonia, isn't it? The story about Sonia seemed particularly charged, especially with Rose's allegation of racial bias. Was there any more to that story with Sonia? I felt, is there any more that you can tell us about it? I don't know. I felt like we could have spent our entire recap just discussing it because there was so much to it. So many witnesses. There was clear violence, racial slurs. There was so much to it just in that little window.
Yeah, I think that was a really scary night for Sonia. I will say that Debbie denies a lot of what was alleged about what she said and did that night. She was charged for threatening that family with the scissors, but she was not prosecuted. She was not found guilty. I think from Sonia's perspective, that was a really harrowing and eye-opening night that spiraled out of control. The story from the podcast is essentially that Sonia's extended family are in this apartment. They are gathering to prepare for the impending death of Sonia's mother, who's sort of in hospice in a bed in this apartment. And Debbie shows up, and there's a lot of tension, and there's the allegations of racial slurs. There is a confrontation on the porch where Debbie allegedly and Sonia sort of are wielding scissors, threatening people. And I hemmed and hawed about whether or not to include this in the story because it's not about the cat. It's not about the cat at all. But to hear Rose talk about how she perceived Debbie's actions, and though Rose did not want this to be a story about race, Rose wanted to keep this focused on a story about what she believed was the theft of her cat. I felt like it would have done the listener a disservice to know this information because I found it through a very simple court records search when I was just trying to figure out if these people had any background that I should know about. It just seemed too on the nose to not include. It was a similar allegation of race being at the heart of an action by Debbie.
Yeah, definitely. It was definitely a story I think I'm glad that was told within this podcast because I think it provided a third party. Like, we're not talking about Debbie, we're not talking about Rose here, we're talking about someone else who has a very clear-cut example of how Debbie and Sabrina acted in this situation. And yeah, I thought it was a very strong example of the pattern that is potentially there for that type of behavior.
And I think as a reporter, it's that pattern that made me feel like, okay, this is an appropriate thing to include in the story.
Absolutely.
With Debbie's reflections on that night included as well. I mean, we didn't really talk about it at length, but she really very much denied the allegations
I'm just curious what you talked about this a little bit at some of the responses that you've got or reactions that you've got just from not from the people involved, but just generally to the podcast. But I'm curious more just kind of broadly, what kind of feedback have you gotten? What have you heard as people's response?
That's a great question. I tried not to read too many online comments about it because I think that can be damaging to one's spirits. So
Sure.
I picked and choose what kind of reviews I read. There were some nice words written about it in some other publications. There was a really interesting sort of thought piece review written about coming back to This American Life, how it felt like a podcast in what was described as the Glassian mode. So this idea that people like me who grew up steeped on Ira Glass now sort of have taken his style, his format, everything about what he does, which is so good, and ape it in our own work. And I would be the first to admit that that's what I do. The podcast, it didn't go viral. It didn't blow up. Like we didn't crack any top 10 lists, and maybe that's okay. Maybe it's a little too niche for some people, but I was proud of it at the end of the day. I think we had really beautiful music in it from Jason Moon of Bear Brook. There was wonderful editing support from the team here, and I think as a finished product, I'm really proud of it. I think it did Sergeant Tibbs justice. Like I feel like we got as close as we could to understanding what happened to that cat. And we did it in under 90 minutes.
And as we say, like, it hasn't blown up yet. It hasn't gone viral yet. You never know.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Once we put out our preview and recap, who knows what might happen. I've actually shared it with so many people because a lot of my friends listen to true crime, and a lot of my friends also are cat people, and I'm like, you gotta listen, whether you're into true crime or you're into cats. Like, I feel like this is a great story to listen to.
Yeah. I thought initially that people who have pets, but cats in particular, would hear it differently, perhaps. I suppose you people with dogs or parrots, I don't know. I suppose anybody who attaches to an animal in the way that, you're just going to attach when you have them living with you would feel this story and hear it perhaps differently, because you can put yourself so easily in the perspective of Rose, which is that your pet disappears, you find out somebody else has it and they're not giving it back. And it's like, how do you react in that moment?
Yeah, I think that's the sort of immediate, and that was also my immediate reaction. But also, I think, like, and we talked about this in our episodes on this, but like, I've taken a pet to the emergency vet, and suddenly I'm dropping thousands, maybe not $6,000, but a lot of money. And I've also, like, I've found people's pets that have been out in the wild and been like, oh, what do I do? I've not this type of situation where it's like, an elderly cat who needs significant care, but I think as a longtime pet owner, I think to empathize with kind of Debbie's and Sabrina's side of this, of we want this animal to be well, and I mean, they made a major commitment to doing that. We haven't talked about that, but I think that's important to know.
They are animal lovers. That should not be lost in all of this. That Debbie and Sabrina are animal lovers. They have a number of their own pets in their house. They took measures above and beyond what I think a lot of people would do if they found a sickly cat in that condition. I mean, they spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time with this found cat. But the question becomes, once you know it's somebody else's cat, what do you do in that moment? Do you keep it?
Well, but I also, I mean, if I can jump back to the topic earlier about, if you find a cat and you believe that cat is coming from an abusive home, like, that's a whole different conversation. Like, yes, you've identified the owner, but if you think that cat is going to be unsafe in that home, that changes the decision. Like, I think that was presented very well on the podcast of, like, it's not as cut and dry as I found the owner, return the cat to the owner. It's more complicated.
I have a question that's related to this, which is, Todd, you were at the house. You were at Rose's house. You saw where the shop was. Do you think that Debbie and Sabrina knew Rose and knew Sergeant Tibbs before this all happened?
They would have seen each other on multiple occasions. Rose clearly knew who Debbie was because Debbie's the landlord of the building.
Yeah.
It's possible that Debbie had seen Rose out on her porch. Did she know it?
And
was
Sergeant
the cat
Tibbs
from
used to come
that
into the
property?
back area of...
Yeah, the buildings are so close together. It's an outdoor cat. I don't know. I don't know. I can't say for certain whether or not they immediately knew that it was Rose's cat. I mean, they took steps that suggest they didn't. They posted on a message board that they had found this cat. They proceeded to go through so much inexpensive veterinary care. And it shouldn't be lost that when they were instructed to return the cat, they did so in a way. Like, they were told to return this cat, and the next morning they woke up and they drove Tibbs to the animal shelter to turn him over. He happened to be dead, but they were following orders, and it was only a few days after they'd been, sort of first interacted with by animal control and the Manchester police. But to your point, Jeff, I think you're absolutely right. I think these are really complicated moments. If you find a sickly cat, sickly dog, you see something, you don't know what you should do, you don't know how to get involved. Yeah, I think that's a tough one.
So was there anything, so you said this is your first podcast. Are you working on any others or any other things that you wanted to promote?
No.
Are you like never again?
Oh, I absolutely would, but it took me, like 15 years into my career before this story came along. I don't know if it'll be another 15, but no, I'm back doing daily and features, news for our radio airwaves. But if the right story comes along, I would absolutely love to do it again.
Should we encourage people to donate to their local NPR station?
That would be much appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
Now more than
I will say
more than ever.
I am a sustaining member of ours out here and very proud of it, and encourage everyone to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you, though. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thank you for taking this time to chat
so
with us.
much.
This was great.
It was so
It was
great
really
to
nice
talk to you.
both. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening to the final days of Sergeant Tibbs.
We hope you enjoyed our chat with Todd Bookman as much as we did.
As a reminder, if you haven't listened yet, check out our 2 episodes on the final days of Sergeant Tibbs. We have a link to those episodes in our show notes.
And you'll also find a link, because by this point, you definitely should have listened to the original podcast, The Final Days of Sergeant Tibbs. But if you somehow have gotten this far in listening to us and you have not listened to The Final Days of Sergeant Tibbs, go check out that link. We'll include that as well.
And before we go, a quick reminder to check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/so much crime, so little time. We post all kinds of great stuff there. News on the show, outtakes, bonus clips, and more. And please remember to subscribe to our show and leave us a rating on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Jeff, we've got a different podcast coming up for you. I'm wondering, what do you know about America's relationship to weight loss camps for kids?
What do I know about weight loss camps for kids? I don't feel like anything good. I don't feel like this is going to be a good story.
I mean, shockingly, the next episode of So Much Crime, So Little Time will not deal with a really positive, upbeat story, because that's not how we deal here. We are going to look into a weight loss camp for kids that was running for 50 years and how an investigation found there was a lot of mistreatment and a real horrendous culture of fat phobia that enabled this to continue for over 50 years. Next time we're going to be discussing Camp Shane by I Heart Podcasts. That's on the next So Much Crime,
So Little Time.
So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of MimeGov Media. The executive producer is Paxton Calariso. Our associate producer is Blythe Ty. Theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to this show in your podcast app. Don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.